So
Go ahead.
Aloha Aina is patriot.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a patriot.
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
A newly discovered patriot because I didn't know about this side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So while I'm at New Mexico military, before I'm graduating, I'm going to graduate with my commission as a second lieutenant. I signed a contract, 3 years active duty, 3 years reserve, and then an associate's degree in pre-business. So maybe a month before I'm going to graduate, I get a call from my mom, and she tells me that my tutu got cancer and that she is in my uncle's house next door, where one of the rooms was converted into a hospice room. And she had, I believe, lung cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So my tutu told my mom to tell me that she won't die until I come home. And also that my Uncle Johnny Joe won't die, but he was in a VA hospital, I think in Washington, but he didn't make it home in time. He was major suffering from PTSD, Vietnam. He was a Vietnam vet, right? So when I came home, I'm going to transfer to University of Hawaii to get my bachelor's so that, I can continue to fulfill my contract, 3 years active duty, 3 years reserve. So when I came home, I joined the Hawaii Army National Guard to begin to fulfill that 3 years reserve requirement, right? First of the 487 Field Artillery. And then all my tutu wanted me to do was to sit down with her and just listen to her stories, right? And she would never let anybody in except for me. And she would make sure I closed the door. So my uncles and aunties were always outside, right? And my tutu was sharing with me some unbelievable stories.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the tutu that I grew up with. My tutu was very meek, very humble, strong though, right? She had to raise 9 children on her own because her husband, my papa, Henry Keanu Reeves, passed away when my mom was only 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And she was the second oldest. So the story she was telling me was mind-blowing. She was born in 1910, okay? Mm-hmm. And she started to talk about stories, but the way she talked about it was more like she was reliving it. Mm-hmm. It was more like an experience she was reliving. Because the way she was talking, it was different. Like at some point, she sounded like she was a child talking, right? So one story that she was sharing that stood out for me was Uncle Paneco, who I knew as an older uncle, always came to visit. He got dirty lickings because he didn't properly bow to the prince. That's what my tutu is telling me. And I was like, okay, tutu, who's the prince? Do we have an uncle named Prince? There's no Prince Kuhio. I went, what? What is she doing in the house? Oh, that's my dad's good friend. And then she just goes on to another story, almost like it's nothing. And the stories thereafter was just like amazing. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to take it. I was just enthralled, just listening. And then when it's Paul, I go outside and my mom, my uncles, my aunties, what did Ma say? So I started to explain. And they said, oh, it must be the morphine, for the pain. I said, no, she was pretty lucid. She was spot on. But nobody really understood what was going on. So before my tutu passed, maybe a month before she passed, she made me promise her that I would know my genealogy. Because she said, Keanu, when you know your genealogy, you will know who you are and what you need to do. Okay, tutu. Now, back then, I'm just full on military, and I got to get my bachelor's degree. So my tutu passed. I took the route to get a degree in sociology. As soon as I graduated, I didn't even walk for graduation. I headed straight to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, go through officer's basic course to get branch qualified field artillery. And I had already been in the Guard at that time. I was at for 3 years, right? So that really set me on a course of military, and I loved it, right? Loved it big time. And it wasn't like I was doing it because I was an American. I did it because my uncle was in Vietnam. So when I saw the fatigues and everything and his jungle boots, it was almost like something, that's what I want to do. But I didn't know the particulars of my uncle being drafted, the PTSD, the drugs, all that stuff. But I just wanted to be in the Army, like my family. So it gets to a point where 1992, I didn't fulfill my tutu's request to me that I need to know my genealogy. And that's when I got focused. And I went, okay, I got to know my genealogy. Where do I start? So I heard that the archives on the palace grounds, they help Hawaiians do their genealogy for Hawaiian homes to get started. And I went there and I said, hey, I don't want to apply for Hawaiian homes, but I want to know, how do I begin to learn my genealogy? Where do I start? I had no idea. So they said, the first thing to do, why don't you go look at this book, which was on the shelf. It was a paperback book, and it was genealogies printed in newspapers. And this book was published 1980s. Edith Mackenzie gathered all these newspapers and reprinted them from Hawaii newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
So I pulled one out, and I went to the index, and I went to the name Simerson, because that's my tutu's maiden name. So that's an unfamiliar name, right? Not everybody knows Simerson, right? And when I went to the index and I saw Simerson, I went, hey, it's right here. Page 58. Turned to page 58. It said, Mo'oku'au Hawali'i, genealogy of nobility. Huh? And then it started with Liloa from the 15th century, king of Hawaii Island. And it went all the way to my great-grandfather when he was 16 years old in 1896, naming him, his brother Isaac, and his sister Rose. And I was like, that's my tutu's dad. That's who my tutu was talking about. So I wanted to know who he was. I never had a picture of him. My tutu didn't have a picture of him. So I looked through the census reports, and I found a census report. This was, I think, maybe 1913. So my tutu was she was 3 years old at that time. So they lived in Kalihi, adjacent to Auld Lane. Forgot the specific name of that street. And as I'm looking at the family household, it's listing my great-grandparents, their names, my great-grandmother's brother, that's the Pahau side of the family, and then my tutu as an infant, and then they had a Japanese name. I was like, what is that? It was a Japanese name that started with an S. So I looked next to occupation. It said servant.
Oh.
I was like, what the hell is this? Had no idea.
Wow. From
me knowing my tutu when she was alive. And that just got me so revved up to just dive into it. And in the Army, we call it gather intel. And I was just gathering as much intel as I could just to understand who these people were. So then I found out that my great-grandfather, William Kuakini Simerson, was one of the 14 pallbearers of Prince Kuhio's casket and Queen Lili Ukalani's casket. And in the state funeral newspaper, it says these were the 14 high-ranking chiefs of the kingdom. Unbelievable. It was like a whole new world was opening up for me. And I had a personal stake in it because that's my great-grandfather. That's my tutu. That's going back to Liloa, right? So I began to look at how the government operated, where did they work, who were the great-great-grandparents. And I quickly realized that everything that I was taught at the university and at Kamehameha schools regarding the Hawaiian Kingdom era was all wrong. The idea that the missionaries controlled everything, you couldn't find that. They controlled it after 1893. And on top of that, they weren't missionaries. They were descendants of missionaries. They were lawyers, businessmen, right? They weren't missionaries, right? So naturally, the aha moment for me came when I began to look into 1893 and what happened, the invasion, right? So I'm reading the Blunt report, right? He's a special commissioner appointed by President Cleveland to investigate the overthrow. So he's in Hawaii. He arrived in Hawaii just prior to April 1st, 1893. He started his investigation April 1st. So I'm looking at all these documents, like government reports, not newspapers and people saying this. No, I'm looking at government reports. And then President Cleveland's message to the Congress in 1893, December 18, concluding what he found. So that's what I'm looking at. And then my aha moment was, this is exactly what Saddam Hussein did when he invaded Kuwait in the first Gulf War in 1990. So Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and he sent the Kuwaiti government into exile. And 1 week later, he annexed Kuwait, called it the 19th province of Iraq. Now, in 1990, when that was going on, I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, going through officers advanced course as a captain. And we're going through battle training and staff training, right? So we're getting live intel coming in from Iraq, because some of us could be activated to go into that theater. So we're taking this information dead seriously. And everybody knew, and Army regulations show, if you overthrew the government, you don't have the sovereignty of that country. That's called occupation. And you have to temporarily administer the laws of the occupied state until you get a treaty of peace. That's in Army regulations, Field Manual 27-10 and 27-5. It's all there. So that's what we understood. So when I looked at Hawaii, I'm like, wait a minute. What was overthrown was the government, not the country, and we're occupied.
Mm-hmm.
So how did Hawaii become a part of the United States? Oh, I found out that in 1898, Congress passed a law annexing Hawaii, saying, you're ours. That's exactly what Saddam Hussein did in 1990. He passed a law from Baghdad saying Kuwait is the 19th province. And that was my OMG, WTF, because I'm in the Army.
Yeah.
And I'm going, hey, wait a minute, am I in the right Army?
So did you have this like internal conflict of like, I'm here serving the American government, yet they're the ones that kind of screwed us over?
No.
Okay.
Because I was an Army officer. So we're trained to deal with any situation.
Okay.
No task is daunting.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we were trained. And I just went, okay, WTF, got it. I just got to get more intel.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions I had, I looked for more answers.
Yeah.
And that is what we call in the Army the estimate process on how you can come to a decision. So I hadn't come to a decision, but I came to realize there's more answers that I need to seek, because these questions will affect me directly.
Mm-hmm.
And this had nothing to do with the sovereignty movement.
Mm-hmm.
This was just me being a battery commander, Charlie Battery, 1st of the 487 Field Artillery, M102s, 105 howitzers. And I loved it, right?
So you had no interest in this before?
No.
It all came up to your tutu stories, military, and you just started to make all these connections, and you're like, I got to do something about it because nobody else is doing anything about it.
It became personal.
Mm-hmm.
It totally became personal. And what I began to realize was I had the training as a military officer to deal with this type of situation because we're occupied.